Hey everyone, and so we've come to the game that started it all. Welcome to my next Souls series area ranking. Today I'm going to be ranking every level in Demon's Souls from worst to best. I should note that I'm going off of the remake for this video, even though I'm pretty sure very little has changed beyond the obvious graphical upgrades. With that said, let's dive right in with number 15. As I'm sure you all know, pretty much every game in the series has some form of a swamp area with enough commonalities that it's pretty much a trope of FromSoft titles. Well, not only was Demon's Souls the game that invented this concept, but it also has quite possibly the most annoying of them all. Unlike future iterations such as Blighttown and Fair and Keep, you can't even roll in the Swamp of Sorrow unless you completely avoid the toxic muck. In addition to that, much of this area is nothing more than wide open space with items hidden in the corners, so really the muck feels like it's meant to make traversing this hellhole more tedious rather than adding a unique design mechanic. The enemies in this area mainly consist of the depraved ones carried over from the previous area, and there are ganks of them everywhere when you get close to the Dirty Colossus. This is definitely one of the worst areas in the series and went on to inspire many of the series' future duds. Man, this area is one long, painful slog down to Leechmonger. The Depraved Chasm is mainly a giant boardwalk that precedes the Swamp of Sorrow and serves as an introduction to the Valley of Defilement. Thankfully, it's not as poorly designed as what comes after, but I still have a lot of complaints. Number 1, ganks. I already mentioned that I find the depraved ones to be among the most annoying, spammy little bitches in the entire game, and they're even more numerous here than in the swamp. Number 2, there are plenty of precarious ledges that you have to fight these guys on, and even when I save this area for the end of a run, I still find it easy to get tag teamed and swept off of these ledges. There's also one room filled with a bunch of tiny rats that give you the plague. Dispatching all of them without getting hit is ridiculously hard to pull off, and it's unlikely that players will have the means to deal with the plague at this point in the game. Unless of course you have a lot of souls to spend. Overall, this is another lazy, boring area, but it's still nothing compared to what you'll find after conquering it. While I happily bitched about the 5th Archstone with no relent, if I'm being honest, I don't hate the smithing grounds at all. Instead, I just find it to be kind of bland and just lifeless. These mines are chocked full of those tanky scale miners, and these dudes feel way more tedious to kill than they should be for the amount of souls they give you. I'm serious, these fuckers are everywhere waiting to corner you in these tight hallways and hack you to death. Also, dogs. Fucking dogs. I suppose the fire lizards are kinda cool, and there are plenty of shortcuts to make this area feel a bit more interactive and distinctive, but its overall subdued vibes and lousy enemies make it largely forgettable when compared to Demon's Souls' other areas. If my ranking is any indication, the 2nd and 5th Archstones are not particularly well designed. When it comes to the Tunnel City, I find that it's largely similar to the smithing grounds. Initially, you're met with more scale miners and some rather annoying exploding minecarts. Thankfully, it picks up in quality a little bit once you reach the sketchy descent down towards Flamelurker. I like that you can choose to take the shortcut down to him right off the bat if you're willing to risk falling to your doom. The other section of the Tunnel City is entirely optional, but it does have some nice loot, including a room filled with crystal lizards. It also has these really weird bear bugs and even the first appearance of patches in the entire series. This area also has the Filthy Man, who sells some pretty important upgrade materials. Yeah, I forgot to mention some of the other merchants like the Filthy Woman when I was talking about the Depraved Chasm because of how dull that area is. Anyways, the Filthy Man does sell some really useful items, but I can understand how players find his placement to be annoying due to how far you need to travel in order to find him. Despite the things that I like about this area, it still has plenty of annoying rockworms, and it's a real pain in the ass to collect some of the items. Thankfully, while this place is certainly a mixed bag, I'd say that we're now moving into the areas that I at least find to be decent. Maybe I spoke too soon? I don't know, the tutorial area is fine and certainly not bad in any sense, but it's quite short compared to that of other Souls games and has hardly any items to collect or enemies to defeat. I mean, sure, the Undead Asylum from Dark Souls is fairly short, but there are plenty of extra snippets to explore in the area, and surprises like the Boulder Trap and the epic dropdown of the Asylum Demon make it a bit more exhilarating. Ultimately, the tutorial in Demon's Souls doesn't have anything that memorable to compare. It does at least cap off with the Vanguard fight, and I actually think it's kinda cool that you're supposed to die to him here and finish him off later in 4-1. I just wish there was a little more to do before you reach him to make this area worth playing in repeat runs. I'm sure that including below the Nexus as its own area is going to be controversial, but it's pretty significant lore-wise and is meant to represent the climax of the game. One could argue that there is no actual content to this gorgeous landscape, but I beg to differ. The epic cutscene as the Old One arrives is excellent and easily one of the most memorable visuals in the entire game. And while there are no items to search for or enemies to block your path to the true king, you do at least get to speak to the Maiden in Black one more time before entering the Old One and beating Elant to a pulp. The first Archstone as a whole is pretty excellent, but the Lord's Path is certainly the least striking of them. The area is essentially a long bridge with 2 levels for you to traverse. The bottom one is easily the least interesting because it's basically just a long hallway with some dogs and basic hollows. Above, however, is the bridge itself, and it has one of the game's best environmental hazards, the Red Dragon. Thankfully, I never found the dragon to be unfair to deal with, and it's really not required to kill him at all. In fact, if you time it right, you can usually sprint past the danger zones and hide behind rubble when necessary. I've never actually tried to kill the dragon because from what I've heard it takes a long time and doesn't sound particularly fun. Once you finally reach the fog gate to the Tower Knight boss room, there are a few blue-eyed knights to kill and an upper level to loot. This is definitely one of the shorter levels in the game, but I still enjoy it for some early game thrills. Just as a side note, do not let yourself enter Black World Tendency in the Ritual Path. This happened to me once, and it was actually one of the toughest levels to get through in the entire series for me. But even without Black World Tendency, this area is still tough. It's easily one of the longest in the game, and there aren't any notable shortcuts. Thankfully, I find it to be pretty exhilarating from start to finish. Within, you'll fight some more skeletons and storm beasts, but the real distinctive feature of this hillside is the many reapers within. These beefy enemies spawn an infinite amount of these weird ghost monsters until they're killed. This makes for not only some great soul farming, but also a rather engaging challenge for you to overcome. Of course, there are some tight corridors that feel a bit unfair to throw a bunch of these enemies into, but it's nothing you can't overcome with patience. Once you make it to the gorgeous slug pit, which is great for slime farming by the way, you're finally at the boss. I do wish this area had a shortcut since the boss run is so long and tedious and you kinda deserve a reward for making it through this entire place. But when you're just first exploring it, I find it to be pretty enjoyable. Once you enter the King's Tower, you're in the home stretch. This is another area that's pretty short and represents a run up to the False King more than anything else, but there's still a good amount of things to do. Your first challenge is to kill this gank of red NPC phantoms, which sounds bad, but they're actually quite easy to separate, and from there I find them pretty enjoyable to fight. Next, you'll find a crystal lizard that will likely drop the items you need to make your final upgrades before finishing the game's story. There are also plenty of beefed up red-eyed knights to give you hell as you make your way up to the elevator that takes you to the boss fight. I understand that some might find it to be annoying that they're basically the same enemies you've fought through the entire first Archstone, just with buffed damage, but I actually like the change as it forces you to actually learn their attack patterns if you haven't already. This time around, the blue dragon makes his appearance, and if I'm being honest, I'd actually consider him to be one of the weaker elements of the tower. Thankfully, it's not too difficult to run past him, and from there you're basically making your approach to the endgame. If nothing else, this area is still a fine build-up to one of the best bosses in the game. Let me get one complaint out of the way. The island's edge's one blemish is those goddamn manta ray beasts. They are so fucking annoying for players who primarily use melee, and they're everywhere. Other than that, I have very few issues with this beautiful locale. This place immediately sets its tone as you encounter the dreaded rolling skeletons. I know some players find these guys to be frustrating to deal with, but I'd actually argue that they're some of the best skeleton-type enemies in the series. It's also cool that you get to fight Vanguard again, and the revenge kill is always a ton of fun, although I do wish that he was treated as an actual boss here instead of just another random obstacle. So yeah, other than the storm beasts, I actually really like this area. There's not a whole lot else to say about it, it's just consistently good content. You'll face a lot of cool skeletons as you make your way around the gorgeous cliffside of the island towards the Adjudicator encounter. This area is certainly not flawless, but it's definitely a ton of fun to make your way through. This is the first true area of Demon Souls. Much like other areas in the series such as the Undead Burg and Central Yharnam, the Gates of Boletaria does a great job of teaching players how to safely navigate their environment while still holding plenty of challenges within. I'm looking at you, Red-Eyed Knight. Yeah, it's easy to forget that this is the area where you encounter Old King Doran, who's definitely a total badass and harder to kill than probably any boss in the entire game. In addition, this area has great winding design with shortcuts and other various gates to open with plenty of items to gather inside. The gates also mark your first encounter with Ostrava, if you're interested in his quest line. Not gonna lie, the first time I saw him I actually thought he was an enemy. Thankfully, I quickly realized that he was actually in need of rescue, making him one of the more interactive NPCs in the series. This is another area that has a ton of content, some of which should actually be saved for late game, which I like. It has nearly every quality of a good Souls area, and for that I think it's definitely worthy of the top 5. The best area of the first Archstone for me remains the Inner Ward. To the best of my knowledge, this is the only area in the entire game that has cutscenes with recurring enemies that interact with the environment to give you more of a challenge. This is a really cool idea, and obviously having an unlockable shortcut to the boss is a huge plus in Demon's Souls, being that there are no bonfires to rest at on your way. This place also looks incredible, especially with the remake's enhanced graphics. The enemies are mostly enjoyable to fight, even if a few specific plazas rely a little too heavily on ganks to make things difficult. I see a lot of people complain about the 3 Red-Eyed Knights just before the Penetrator boss, but I actually don't mind them at all. Sure, they seem to have unlimited stamina, which is a little iffy, but they can easily be separated and killed one at a time, or you can straight up ignore them and run to the Fog Gate. Thanks to its looping design and overall solid enemy placement, I'd say that this is certainly one of the coolest areas in the series. As I'm sure you've guessed by now, I'm a huge fan of the third Archstone. Upper Latria is easily one of the most beautiful areas I have ever seen in gaming. Yep, this is another one that really got enhanced visually in the remake. You spend much of your time in this area on thin ledges, and because of that you always need to watch your step. What makes this difficult is the fact that there are plenty of real gargoyles among the various statues waiting to ambush you. Trying to kill them without making a misstep is a difficult but thrilling task. Upper Latria is also super interactive in that in order to progress you need to figure out how to destroy this enormous heart-looking thingy that rests in the main tower. And in order to do that you need to travel down below the tower, and my god are the enemies down there terrifying. Soon you'll realize that the giant beating heart is actually not a heart at all, but rather an enormous egg sac filled with these man centipedes. After that it's really just a run to the man-eaters, but rarely have I felt such anticipation for exploring an entire area as much as I did with Upper Latria. I still struggle to decide what my favorite hub area in the series is, but the Nexus is certainly a strong contender. The opening cutscene that you watch as your character makes their first appearance in soul form is brilliant. While it doesn't have the many branching paths of Firelink Shrine or Majula, this place has an amazing atmosphere. The colors and textures in its many candlelit hallways are mesmerizing to say the least. This might also be the hub area with the most NPCs. Of course, some of them, like the Stockpiler, represent a few of the game's weaker mechanics, but many of them also have some of the most engaging dialogue you could ever ask for. This place is just so much fun to explore, and its calm yet haunting atmosphere is absolutely the cherry on top. You may think I'm over-exaggerating it, but I seriously cannot get the image of the Nexus out of my head. It's as if it's permanently been burned into my memory. Speaking of haunting areas, the Prison of Hope is easily one of the creepiest levels I've ever had the pleasure of sneaking through in all of gaming. This place actually reminds me a little bit of Irithyll Dungeon from Dark Souls 3, but unlike that area, this one understands the Souls formula perfectly. First, I'll get the obvious out of the way and repeat that this maze-like prison is insanely eerie. Each time you round a corner or open a cell, there's a building sense of fear that there could be danger ahead. Hell, this might actually be the only area in the series with true jump scares. I'm obviously referring to the dead hollows and those medieval-looking traps. As a fan of horror, I have to say that I definitely enjoyed this and wish the Souls series delved into that subgenre a bit more often. And oh boy, how could I possibly talk about this area without mentioning the Mind Flayers? These dudes and their jingling little lanterns are creepy as hell and can easily catch you off guard and obliterate you. If that's not enough to make you insane, this prison is an absolute maze with many hallways that look identical. This can seriously mess with you at times and make you question your sanity as you try to decide where you've been and where you haven't. I mean, damn, I haven't even talked about the NPCs yet, but I feel like I'd better end the video now before I go on for hours gushing about how this area is perfect. Just to clarify, playing through the remake was actually my first time experiencing Demon's Souls because I didn't have a PlayStation 3 to enjoy the original on. Overall, I love the game, and most of its areas are surprisingly well designed and serve as excellent templates for FromSoft's later games. As always, I want to give a huge thanks for watching this video. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed it and feel free to post your ranking in the comments. Remember, this video is just my opinion. Have an awesome day and I'll see you guys in the next one.